Hey everyone, I'm Secular Spirit, and in this very special live stream, I'm joined finally after what seems like months of us, trying to schedule things and then canceling and then rescheduling. I'm joined by Holy Humanist Nuriyah Khan. Hi Nuriyah, how's it going?
Hi, very well, thank you. And apologies, a lot of this delay was my fault. So thank you for being so accommodating. And I'm glad we're finally doing this.
I know. I've been wanting to do something for a long time, and when I thought of this idea, I thought it would be perfect because I believe, correct me if I'm mistaken, but you're currently in law school or working towards going to law school?
Yes, I'm doing my master's to work towards
Okay.
qualifying, but yes.
There you go. So, yeah, the idea for this live stream was to basically uh, look at the main defenses that you've heard, I'm sure, many times from Muslims over the problematic parts of their religion. These are things that I heard when I was Muslim. These are things I said when I was Muslim, and they are things I see come up time and time again on posts I make from coming from Muslims. So, yeah, that's the idea of it. What we wanted to do is to take turns perhaps playing the devil's advocate, as the title of the video suggests, of looking at it from the Muslim perspective and trying to understand it from the Muslim perspective, which I think is really important because I don't want to see Muslims as an enemy. I don't view them as an enemy. It's the ideas that I want to tackle and challenge. And I understand why they're so powerful because I used to believe them myself. Would you say you feel the same way, Nuria?
100%. And I just love the idea behind what you've done here is because, like you said, some of these arguments, just because now we have to kind of like counter them in our day-to-day activism or whatever, now for us, we've probably gone so far on the other side where we're so immune to these arguments and we already know like how to counter it. But it is really important to take time and understand why Muslims believe what they do or why they think the way they do or however they rationalize it, as we're going to attempt to do today. So I really like that. I think sometimes with this activism, it can get quite confrontational, and we don't want to be pushing Muslims away. We want them to engage. And this is the best way for us to kind of say, okay, we're trying our best to understand your point of view as well. And your line of thinking. So yeah, kudos for this idea. Brilliant.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, that's the best way of putting it. This is a way, if nothing else comes out of this video, I think it's a way for if Muslims come and watch to just understand our perspective and that we understand where they're coming from. And this is why we may agree in some areas and why we disagree in maybe some fundamental areas. So, yeah, with that out of the way, I wanted to mention a couple of things before we get really started. So, uh, this is something that came to me from someone who's on Instagram. Their handle is Haram Doodles. I highly recommend checking them out. I think I left a link in the video description. And so they reached out with this idea of promoting an ex-Muslim awareness month, which I think is a fabulous idea. So the suggested month for that is the upcoming one, December. So the idea is to just share the stories and perspectives of ex-Muslims that have been silenced for various reasons, that live in hiding from their family, friends, loved ones, maybe even their own, like their significant others in some cases, from their communities because of all the repercussions that come with it. And I mean, this is a forum. This channel is a forum, and Nuria, your channel is a forum for ex-Muslims to kind of finally speak out and for people to know that these challenges are happening. I've been trying to, just share my own experiences of leaving Islam with people in my personal life more and more, and sharing that I'm an ex-Muslim and that I'm involved in ex-Muslim things. And usually the response I get from people who aren't, part of the Muslim world is, "Oh, I didn't realize this was a thing," or "I never thought about that," or and I hope that something like this ex-Muslim month, can change that.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I'm really glad you're feeling confident enough to have those conversations because that's when we're really getting somewhere is when I mean, this is the whole concept of behind why we all speak out. It's to normalize dissent. But like you're saying, I mean, I don't know, I think it's probably the same with you still, but there are certain people in my family I'm just hoping and I was going to say praying, hoping and wishing that they don't stumble across my YouTube because I just genuinely don't think we're ready for that discussion or that confrontation.
I feel the same way. Yeah. There's
Yeah,
some people who I don't know how it would even go.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is deep. Like, I think one of my cousins found my Twitter randomly, and he's quite young and he has got very, very religiously devout Muslim friends. But he full on said, like, I don't want to speak to her ever again. She's written ex-Muslim in her bio. And I'm like, wow, you're so young. And like you take it, you haven't even had a discussion with me, but that's fine. But yeah, this is great, this initiative. So just to kind of piggyback off what Secular Spirit was saying, Haram Doodles is a fantastic Instagram account. Now, while all of us can't leave Islam and then like speak out for various reasons, not to mention the death penalty associated with apostasy, but for a variety of reasons we can't speak out. But a lot of the time you see religious people, when they come out, they really need an outlet or a forum of expression. So Haram Doodles, her outlet is basically Instagram and doodling, and she's actually managed to capture so many ex-Muslim stories and various aspects of the liberation one feels when they've left religion behind. So whether it's like wearing what you want, whether it's getting your first tattoo, whether it's going to a mixed swimming pool or whatever it could be, but she captures these really intricate moments, and obviously a picture speaks 1,000 words, right? So I would definitely encourage you to check out her Instagram and also submit your stories, because she can turn it into something really
Yeah, yeah,
powerful.
yeah. I've seen that. It's really cool, actually. She's really talented.
Yeah, honestly, really, really talented. So again, we're coming out in our droves, and everyone's coming out of the woodwork. And on various platforms, you're seeing different representations. But this initiative, basically Ex-Muslim Month, I think is fabulous to kind of bring it all together. So Haram Doodles kind of gave me a little background on how it came to be. So basically, there was an apostate, some clever apostate from the Ex-Muslim subreddit. Basically is a coalition of ex-Muslim content creators, organizations, infidels, murtads, as she likes to say, blasphemers, and apostates from around the world. They've collectively decided to launch an ex-Muslim awareness month in December. So this is going to be 30 days dedicated to raising awareness and support of people who courageously leave Islam. So we're here to kind of kickstart this movement, and we want to do it now in November so that we can counter what is Islamophobia Awareness Month. So basically, the theme that she's saying of 2022 is ex-Muslims are here and we will not be silenced. So please, from now on, if we can start being mindful to use the hashtags, hashtag ex-Muslim awareness month and ex-Muslims are here 2022, that would be a great start. I will be giving the same disclaimer before all my upcoming streams, and I'm sure Secular Spirit will be doing the same
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. I'll be posting that hashtag throughout
Mhm.
anything I post. I'm not very good at the hashtag game, but I'm gonna do my best with this one. Yeah.
We need you with this one, Secular.
Yeah, and I encourage everyone watching to do the same if you want to support this idea, or if you see value in the idea. I think it really will help. Yeah. Yeah, and I also wanted to mention that I'm actually going to be appearing on another live stream immediately after this one at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's on a channel called Skeptic Haven, and the discussion is going to be about what's happening in Iran right now with Mahsa Amini, the protests, the reaction from the government in Iran to everything that's going on. I think it's a pretty fascinating subject. There's going to be a couple people on. I'm not sure if everyone who's going to be there, but I believe, correct me if I'm mistaken, Nuriyah, do you know the person who created Atheist Republic? I think it's Armin Navabi, unless I
Yes.
butchered
Yeah.
the pronunciation or
No, no,
spelling of
no.
that name.
Perfect. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's going to be there as well, so that's going to be interesting. I've been aware of him and the Atheist Republic for a long time before I even started doing any social media stuff, so it'd be cool to finally talk. So I left a link for that in the video description below if you want to check that out. And yeah, I also want to mention to anyone who's been watching this channel for a while, if you find value in this content and the ideas that I'm exploring, I do have a Patreon that I set up. And I'm not really doing this for the money, but what I'll basically say is I do have a day job, and the more support I get, the more I can just turn down my day job assignments and then just work on making more content. I want to make more content, and this is the best way to do it if you want to support my channel. And I wanted to just also mention like a special thank you to someone who just subscribed or became a patron recently. Sil, if you're watching, thank you so much for supporting me and for sharing your story. I was really touched reading your story this morning. And I think it's wonderful what you're doing and that you're trying to explore what you're trying to explore. And I feel the same way about you when it comes to so many things. And I hope to see you in future live streams as well. I'll check to see if you're here, actually. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. And if you want to support this channel, the link is also in the video description. Yeah.
Sil is here, Secular Spirit.
Sil is here. Okay, let's see.
Welcome. Yeah.
Hi, Sil. Good to see you here.
Oh,
Amazing.
that's great. No, and please, if you can, I mean, obviously, like if you can't financially, just even liking, sharing, and we're boosting the algorithm for Secular Spirit's channel. But again, like financial support would do so much. If we can get Secular Spirit away from his assignments and producing more content, then that's what we want. I would love to see you give so much more of your time to YouTube. I understand, like it's so hectic when you are trying to hold down a day job, you know, but yes, please, if you can, we would love to make this Secular Spirit's full-time gig.
Amazing. Yeah. Like I that's exactly how I feel. I want to work on the things that I'm most passionate about, but you know, real life, you know, you have to take care of the bills and all that, and you have to do the things that make money, which isn't necessarily the things that are your passion projects. So to be able to do more of that, getting paid to do your passion is amazing.
It's
and
beautiful.
I hope everyone can have that.
And it makes you jump out of bed in the morning.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, Nuriyah, before we get started, also, is there anything you want to mention or promote?
Well, yeah, just I think tomorrow I'm doing a live stream with Secular Rarity. He's been a feature on Atheist.
Great guy.
Yeah. He's actually been a feature on Atheist Experience. I think he's done a few gigs with Apostate Prophet as well. But basically, I don't know about loads of Christian denominations, so it's going to be interesting to unpack his story from being a Methodist. And obviously, coming to where he is now and his journey and how he got involved with YouTube. So that should be fun. And then I've also got a stream coming up with, I think it's called The Global Atheists and Women Atheists Unloaded. Again, more from the American side of the world. So yeah, that's exciting. I'll obviously put out reminders beforehand, but yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, the thing I'm doing later is Global Atheists as well.
Oh, awesome.
So,
yeah.
small world, the secular world on
Ex-Muslim
YouTube.
representation. I'm liking it.
And okay, so there's one last thing before we get going. So there's a drawing that is awaiting me that was shared to me through Nuriyah. Oops. And let's see, I'm gonna.
I was so excited when I sent this 2 seconds.
I really before I show it, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm not really sure what to say, but I appreciate that you took the time to make this. Okay, let's pull it up. All right, here it is.
Wow.
So I can tell this is coming from the era when I used to wear glasses before I got LASIK. So,
even your hair parting, Secular Spirit. I literally saw you in that picture. I was like, that. Yeah, very well. Like, job well done.
I particularly love the well-defined arms. Yes.
Oh my gosh,
very flattering.
Know.
And the powerful
Check out your
chin.
muscle definition and your jawline.
So yeah, thank you so much again. I think Jojo Freelancer is the one who created this artwork. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And at such short notice, I think you saw that we had a stream and you put together this. So kudos, well done.
Yeah, and anyone else who wants to share fan art like that, feel free to do so. I really enjoyed it.
Are you gonna put them on your wall, Secular Spirit, and frame them?
Maybe. Yeah, I do need more wall art, so maybe that's a good start. Maybe people think I have a bit of a big ego if they come in and see that, but
just pictures of yourself plastered over you.
Art is art, in my opinion. So
okay,
there you go. But yeah, so if you're ready to get started, Nuriyah, let's tackle the main defenses of Islam. That these are ones that I've heard time and time again. And I'm sure anyone who's an ex-Muslim who's watching, and maybe even people who are just ex-Christians or ex-whatever, are familiar with that thing too, with just their own religion. And so it's this defense when, you see something bad in the news or some kind of accusation against Islam. And what they'll say is, well, this isn't true Islam! Exclamation mark. It is not true Islam. And okay, I'll play the devil's advocate here. So the idea is that this thing is not something that I agree with. This is not the Islam that I was taught to believe, and it's not something that I've interpreted the Quran to say, and it's not something that fits with my conception or my belief of what God represents. And that could be for so many things, like the hijab, suicide bombers. You can even find it for things like premarital sex. I've heard some Muslims defend premarital sex, even the punishments for adultery, the punishment against homosexuality, so many things. And I get it in a sense because I think there is a way of arguing that. So, how many Muslims are there right now? Like around 2 billion.
Mm.
So, in a sense, you could say there's 2 billion forms of Islam that vary from one
Yeah.
Muslim to the next. And what this defense really relies on is this idea that there's a true, pure, unadulterated by humanity Islam that is coming from the source, God Himself. And this is the thing that is being violated by these things that these individual Muslims disagree with when it's said that this is Islam. So it's a good argument in a sense because it's kind of hard to refute it. This whole idea of this, perfect, true Islam that exists. I
And
just don't know if it exists, though.
it's true. But also they're not wrong to think that like if you hold that position, right, that like my Islam or my God or my Allah, as far as I've been taught by every person of authority and that I hold to believe to be true, you can, like, that person saying that that's not Islam, to be fair, it's true to them. That is not their genuine held belief, right? So what is obviously in the scripture is a different story, but for all intents and purposes, that is not information that they're privy to. So they are correct in their actual fundamental belief as far as they have held onto their whatever Christian version of Islam, right? And as you said, with every single person, I bet even you and I, when we were believing Muslims, my Allah was maybe more chill than yours. To me personally, He might forgive certain things that I think He wouldn't take too seriously, and you might think, no, that's actually where Allah will completely not, forgive somebody. So even and we are both Muslim, right? When we were, but even within that, I mean, that's what's so funny. Like when Muslims are trying to like date or figure out like what kind of people they should be getting into relationships with, a running joke like, what's your halal to haram ratio? Where do you draw the line? Because everyone has like what somebody's halal is like, we can go to casinos, we can like, wear bikinis, we can drink alcohol, but no pork. Somebody else's haram might be no pork,
Exactly.
no bikinis, whatever. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely a tough one to like argue against. And I find this is the biggest one that keeps most people in the fold. And this is the issue I have with my activism the most. It's trying to tell somebody that their version does not equate to fundamental Islam.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with defending this argument is how do you prove what is the true Islam? Is it, I mean, so you have the major Sunni schools, I think there's four of them, and then there's the Shia, and they split and splinter into various groups, and then there's the smaller ones like the Ibadis. Is true Islam Sufism? Um, a friend of the channel, Robert, made the good point that some people might point to Salafism as what true Islam is because it tries to harken back to what Islam was like in Muhammad's time in the first
Yeah, I've always thought that.
one or two generations or something like that
Yeah.
the birth of Islam. But then you realize that Salafism is something that has only really been a thing for the last couple hundred years. I think I read that it originated in the mid to late 19th century. So what you're actually getting is an interpretation more than 1,000 years later of what the the beginning golden age of Islam was. So even that is a distortion. Like, is that the true Islam? Is the Wahhabi form of Islam the true one? Um, I don't know if you can really have a universal answer to this because each person who belongs to each different kind of belief group will say that theirs is the true one and the others aren't. And beyond that, what can you do? You can just take it down to, well, I believe that God is the only one God, and the Quran is the word of God. But that's all you can really do. Beyond that, everything is open to interpretation. Even the Quran itself is open to so much interpretation. So for me, that's the really tough one with this defense. Like, what is true Islam? It's this
Yeah.
thing that you can make it to be anything, which weirdly makes it a good defense, but a horrible defense at the same time.
Exactly. And because
Mhm.
you will constantly be doing this back and forth then, like, and secular spirit, like for us, who do we start to counter? Is it the Salafis? Is it the Wahhabis? Is it the Sufis? Like, who do you try and explain that your version is wrong? And as you said, like, that's a very good point. Is Salafi Islam the kind of, nearest to the truth? Because as you said, they're trying to harken back to the times where it was pure, unadulterated Islam, like the closest thing to what Muhammad would have wanted, and therefore they try and take a very literalist interpretation of the Quran. And then you've got the Wahhabis who are absolutely carrying out every hudud punishment and things that would be done according to Sharia precisely. So they have a good argument as well. But you do have other mix-ups that get even more like twisted. I think if we look at something like the Nation of Islam, which I mean it's got the terminology in it, but really they were trying to like conflate, oh, let's go back to a pure Islam that's, again, like similar to what the Prophet's time was, but also, having this entire like social movement behind it to like emancipate black people. So they also use the words and they were attributing certain things back to Islam. Do we also go and counter that? But yeah, I said it makes it a very tough one because it's a good defense because it is your true Islam. So that's why, as you said, I'm so grateful that the Quran is as abysmal of a book as it is, because if that's the one thing that they can all agree on, and if that's the one thing that we can point at, that has got enough to just not be compliant with our modern day and age, right? And just full of fallacies and
Well, you say that, but we're going to kind of cover it in the next couple of
okay.
defenses. There's ways that Muslims try to wriggle out of that too, so we'll discuss that. I
Okay.
just wanted to mention a couple more things, that this is something that applies to other religions. Like, I think the one that really comes to mind is Christianity. I had this live discussion on my channel earlier this year with someone who's a Christian, a believer, who also identified as a member of the LGBTQ community. And it was so interesting to hear how he rationalized his Christian beliefs with, his sexuality. And the example he brought up was which is the one that's commonly held to be evidence that homosexuality is considered a sin within Christianity, is the story of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, which is also in the Quran. And so what his point was, it's been misinterpreted that the story seems like it's like the people of Sodom and Gomorrah are being punished for their homosexuality, when if you really look at it, this was his argument, that it's actually their wickedness and that they tried to go around raping people. That was their sin. So it's not clearly explicit that it's their homosexuality. So in his point of view, he didn't necessarily see homosexuality as something that is condemned by the Bible. So for him, that is not condemning homosexuality is not the true Christianity. And
That's
that can
wild.
keep going and going in so many
Man.
ways.
It can, because I mean, okay, that there's a moral to every story, right? That's in the Quran and the Bible, for example. The Quran like emulates the same story, albeit in a bastardized manner, but same like the moral lesson behind it. I guess, yeah. With cognitive dissonance, you could say, I mean, by omission, because it wasn't directly like said that their homosexuality was the grave sin here. If there were other elements of that story, you can clutch onto that. But I mean, overarchingly, if you're trying to extrapolate a moral of the story, you should take all the big moral lessons with the smaller ones. I'm sure there was ways for God to like make that lesson clear to homosexuals without punishing them outright, if that was the case, and like bring down a punishment for wickedness and define what that is a bit more, or make a point out of prosecuting a rapist, to if that was the
Mhm.
issue at hand.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's one of those things where, like, just that like level of open to interpretation makes it very challenging to counter. and it makes a consensus very difficult to exist as well within those religious communities as well. So A. Jansen makes the point that the same argument is made by some Quranist Muslims, and to the point of like, what is the true Islam? Robert, hey Robert, thanks for joining. Makes
Oh,
the
we
point
have
that not
Hassan
all
Adwan in the
Muslims
house.
focus on the Quran. Yeah, that's true. Not all Muslims focus on the Quran, or they kind of see the Quran in a different light.
That's
So
true.
what
But secular spirit,
what's
don't they
left?
have to? Don't you have to by virtue of being a Muslim? I think at the very least, like that. That's. I mean, even I'm not sure really about the Alavis and what they follow, but if you can correct me, is that not at least the one thing that we can cling on to say can unite all Muslims? Surely, I don't know. You tell me.
It's, to me, the way I was raised with Islam, it has to be the thing. So I don't know what is really left. That's the point. Like, this true Islam then becomes this really empty thing that you can just fill in with whatever you want, which makes it very hard to criticize it then, because people become attached to those subjective interpretations and try then to project it as the meaning of the universe. So that's kind of my answer to your question in the comments, Robert. I don't think religions have to have a consensus, and they shouldn't have to. When there isn't a consensus, it leaves a lot open to interpretation, which people then turn into dogmas. I would say that's the risk of where there can be a danger. And let's see what else is in the comments. So Robert, also a good point. There's much better evidence that homosexuality isn't forbidden. That's beyond, going into that a bit more is beyond the focus of this channel, but that is a very good point. So yeah, there's two subsets that I wanted of this defense, Nuri, that I wanted to hear from you about, just your opinion. So part of this isn't true Islam is this idea that something horrible happened, and this horrible thing is not Islam's fault. It's the Muslims who aren't practicing or deploying Islam properly. And you'll see that with, I'm trying to think of a few examples. Like, a big famous one is ISIS and what ISIS did. A more recent one is the person who tried to kill Salman Rushdie. There were so many Muslims who came out and said, this isn't Islam, this isn't true Islam. The problem isn't with Islam that this kind of thing happened. The problem is with this person and whatever led him to do such a horrible thing. So what do you think of that defense?
Again, they are completely justified in their belief in that it does not line up with their version of Islam that they have created and accepted. But fundamentally, there is a level of ignorance at play, right? Because it's only when you actually know that this person is carrying out exactly what Islam tells them to be doing. A lot of people, it all comes back down to Muslims are better than Islam. Most of them are. And I mean, I don't know if I would have ever stumbled into this kind of, world unless that life experience hadn't happened to me. But secular spirit, I could go about my life happily telling everyone in the face of Boko Haram's atrocities, ISIS, what they did to Yazidi girls, I would wholeheartedly say that's not Islam. Like, where would, I mean, if you've taken Islam to be this spiritual philosophy that you abide by, and you're so adamant on monotheism, which is really what Islam just says, like, be heavily like and only monotheistic, there's no room for any other deities. But beyond that, like, as you said, all across the globe you get Islam in various flavors, right? So I mean, this is a great one for them to constantly say any atrocity in the world that happens, well, it's not, I don't condone it, therefore it's not my Islam. And I mean, in at some level, again, they're right. But this is why Sam Harris's quote was so important. He goes, when he says, obviously, the problems are actually the fundamentals of Islam. So when you see these extremist groups in your mind, you can't rationalize that maybe Islam, not even in its purest form, in its basic form, is condoning this behavior. In fact, it's encouraging this behavior. I mean, just as a personal, I never, even after 9/11, I was like living in Saudi Arabia. I kept asking my parents, and they kept saying, no, that's not Islam. Headings that were after the Friday prayer again. As a young child, I'm trying to say, whoa, like what version of Wahhabism is this? And again, just not my Islam, not my Islam. And you can carry on doing that dangerously, I'd say.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, tied to that is this other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which is the culture argument. So this horrible thing is not Islam; it's just the culture. If you can kind of see the connection there, and you'll see it with things like I did mention this to you if you wanted to talk about it before we went live. It's like the whole argument that swirls around FGM, female genital mutilation. There's throughout my whole life I've heard so many Muslims say that has nothing to do with Islam. It's just culture specific. So when it comes to something like that, what would you say?
Yes, again, they're not entirely. I feel so weird defending Muslims this much, but they're not entirely wrong. Like FGM is very much in certain parts of the world, especially like in the African context, it is very much like it comes from a place of culture, even pre-Islam. So that makes sense. But the fact is, again, religion can be used and interpreted in any way. So there is a hadith where Muhammad is he is not outrightly condoning the cutting entirely. He just says don't cut too much. And obviously, we've seen how that's spelt out now. Like, there's a Shia community in India. I think they're called the Bohri community or Bohra community. Excuse me if I've got that wrong, but absolutely actively do FGM on all of their kind of all of the girls within that community. They're expected to, even now in this day and age. So people were trying to get his visa revoked from him being allowed entrance into the UK because he openly advocates for that. And again, it's wild for me to see British Western Muslims were not wanting him to come because of something that he preaches, which is the same Muslim sect that they belong to. So even within the Muslim world, there is obviously contention among these things. But yeah, I think whether or not it's cultural or Islamic, sometimes the lines get very blurred because what Islam did was when it was expanding, it kind of had to take on elements of every culture and then put Islam on top of that. So that's why we see like in the different schools of thought as well across the world, and then all of the little ones beneath that. And I mean, I don't know how many sects of Islam we have today, but fundamentally, even the prophet said, right, like only 3 or something would get into heaven.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the different sects have different views on it, but I mean, this is the problem. Like, what? So is there a true form of Islam if all this stuff gets tacked onto it? Like, does that stuff that gets tacked on become part of Islam, or is it something separate? I really don't know. That's why it's so problematic. And I think one of the big schools, the big Sunni schools, actually supports FGM. I'm trying to remember which one it is. I think it's the Shafi'i one. So FGM is part of that one, but others uh, don't completely endorse it, or they're neutral on it.
Yeah, others don't say
Uh,
anything. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's why for me the culture one is difficult, because then what's the dividing line between the culture and Islam? Uh, that's what makes that part of the defense so hard to really defend. And I wanted to mention one thing just because I read it just recently in this book that I have over here. So this is Karen Armstrong's book, Fields of
Oh,
Blood.
secular spirit. Karen.
Um, so Karen Armstrong, for anyone who doesn't know her, she's this historian. She's British, I believe, and she's written many books about various religions, several books about Islam, and she always defends Islam and its well, what she believes is this tainted perception of it as being very violent. And she mentioned this really interesting incident that some of you watching might be familiar with. So this is in the early days of Islam, and Muhammad and his followers had gone to the city of Medina. They'd fled Mecca, and they were just preparing for this onslaught from Quraysh, who were trying to kill them, coming from Mecca. And what happened was, in Medina, there were a couple of Jewish tribes, and they went into agreements, alliances with these tribes, or pacts, I guess you could say. And after this one particular battle, uh, the Muslims found out that one of the Jewish tribes had uh, been secretly trying to help the enemies of Islam behind their backs. Basically, they violated the treaty. So, what was Muhammad to do? What he basically did was he showed that tribe no mercy. And as Karen Armstrong writes, in accordance with Arab custom, 700 men of the tribe were slaughtered and the women and children sold as slaves. So Karen Armstrong adds something else about this I thought was really interesting. She says that even though the Muslims sentenced the tribesmen for political rather than religious reasons, that's the explanation of what it was. It had nothing to do with the religion. It was something they just had to do because that was the custom, that was the politics of what happened if you transgressed in that kind of way. So this is a story I didn't learn about until after I left Islam. I'd
Same.
heard that there were Jewish tribes that betrayed the Muslims when this whole thing was happening. I didn't hear anything about mass execution and putting women and children into slavery. And so, from the point of view of the Muslim, what they're trying to say is this is a horrible thing that happened, but it wasn't Islam that motivated it. It was just the nature of the time and the things that Muhammad had to deal with.
They're trying to say it's culture at this point. They're trying to
Yes.
put the culture card, custom culture. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So in that kind of way, I just see Muslims kind of wriggling like worms. This is how it feels like to me, of because they know this is a horrible thing. This is why they're coming up with these rationalizations. They know it's a horrible thing, and this can't be Islam because this isn't peace. This isn't love. And they rationalize it by saying, well, the world isn't a perfect place, and there's a lot of compromises that have to happen. You have to work in the world that you're in, and Islam isn't settled and completely built yet. And whenever I hear all these stories, it just makes me think more and more, time and time again, what is so special about Islam then? Like, what is the thing that is so powerful about it that makes such kinds of things impossible to happen? Because they seem to just have happened over and over and over and over again in Islam's early history and throughout its history. If you look at the history of Islam, it's just the history of the Islamic world. It's no different than the history of anywhere else. It's filled with violence, bloodshed, greed, corruption. But the Muslim will say, well, all this is not the true Islam. It's the perversion of it.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it just seems like wriggling, right? Between either this isn't true Islam or that's culture and that's got no place in Islam. But even like what Karen Armstrong was saying, like to blame it on the context and that's what was done. It's like the fact that your so-called religion of peace, this like uber hyper peaceful spiritual religion, is capable of allowing that level of violence under its umbrella. That is also problematic because religions, you would think by just definition of what they say they are, should rise above violence and bloodshed, right? Like even if Christians are kind of slightly wrong on everything in the Bible, at least they hold on to the fact that, I mean, Jesus hasn't got blood on his hands for all we know, in the same way that Muhammad has, if any of them existed. Like you can go into all of this, but like in general, that's what I'm trying to say. But Jack Knife made a really good point in the comments. He's saying, I heard one of the counter arguments is Muhammad was actually following the Torah and punishing them based off their own books. That's a good one. That's
That's an interesting one, especially because I've also heard, not from Muslims, but from people who've criticized Islam and its claims that a lot of Islam is built and based on Judaism, which is an interesting perspective I haven't really researched, but it is, I suppose, a possibility because there are so many similarities. There is this argument that what Islam really is kind of a compilation of things from Judaism, Christianity, and then giving it a little bit of the Arabian flair, if you will.
Yeah, chuck in some paganism, chuck in some
Yep,
Zoroastrianism, chuck in the Mesopotamian gods and
exactly.
sin and all of that. Yeah,
Yep.
it's a complete hogwash of it all. But yeah, heavily influenced by the Torah. And we can't forget, obviously, that Muhammad was actually surrounded by Jews, Jewish tribes. He was coming into contact with so many, and like half the hadiths are him interacting with them and either trying to do the opposite of what they're doing or trying to say, hey, I believe in the same thing. Like, what do we do? It's a complete mix. But no, thank you, Jack. That's actually a great defense I didn't hear before.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say on this defense. Hassan Radwan is watching as well.
Hi,
Thank you for joining,
Hassan.
Hassan. So Hassan's perspective is those who use the excuse that's not true Islam are actually saying God is incapable of delivering his message
Exactly.
clearly. Yeah, that's a good point. And one last thing I just wanted to mention. Sorry if I can't get to all of the comments and questions. Trying to do our best, but we also have to keep it moving. Robert says, by insisting that all Muslims have to use the Quran, you're creating a metric for real Islam yourself. Um, a Muslim who says you have to use the Quran, yes, I agree with you that they're doing that. I don't personally feel that you have to use the Quran. My point is that if you don't even have the Quran, then Islam becomes just this uh, thing that's lacking in substance, which is impossible because people are then filling their lives and finding meaning and finding ways to address different problems and challenges with Islam. So there has to be something beyond just saying there is only one God and that God is Allah or whatever.
Yeah, and
So
I agree exactly with what Secular Spirit was saying on that. I would say like the only reason I want to cling to that is if we remove the Quran, what are we left with? Even if we like go down that line of reasoning, what are you left with? Like if you just want to say like the 5 pillars are Islam, the 6th pillar being jihad, should we even talk about that? But like what if you scale it back, what are you essentially left with? If you even take away the 5 pillars, are you left with just the concept of monotheism? So yeah, then it's problematic in itself. Are we even discussing Islam at this point? So yeah, that would be my
yes, yeah,
comments.
well said, Nuriyah. Thank you. So yeah, let's move on to number 2. This is a very popular one as well. This verse or ayah is not meant to be taken literally.
Really?
And I have a specific one. Let me pull it up. I have a specific one to, there's 2 actually that I want to mention to you. So the first one is, and this is something that has been used by many critics of Islam as showing, well, the Quran is fallacious or like the Quran has mistakes in it. Uh, Hold on, let me see if I can pull it up here. Yes, okay, here it is. Okay. So can everyone see that?
Yep, I can at
Okay.
least.
I'm going to see if I can zoom in a bit just to make it a bit easier to read. Okay. So it is he who has made for you the earth as a bed spread out and inserted therein for you roadways and sent down from the sky rain and produced thereby categories of various plants. So some critics, so Nuri, you can play the devil's advocate here. So some critics of the Quran and Islam have said that, well, this is completely erroneous because it's saying that the earth is flat when we now know that the earth, I mean, most of us know that the earth is not flat, it's round, it's spherical. And so, haha, look at this proof that Islam isn't true. It can't come from the true creator because look at this basic thing it got wrong. And what Muslims will say is, well, that's not meant to be taken literally. So what would you say to that?
I'd say, yes, first of all, Secular Spirit, parts of the Quran say it's literal and parts of it are allegorical. So my first line of defense would be, let's take this as a metaphor. You know, God is just giving you an
Yeah,
overall explanation. And second of all, God is above us in the 7 heavens. So from his viewpoint, he is kind of spreading it out. Like we're here as these tiny human beings on earth. So, you know, now we know it's spherical, but that's not what God was trying to like lay out to us in that description. But can I just say, like, even as I'm saying this, what a vague and shabby description of like the entire universe. But yeah, no.
it's meant to be poetic, you know, and I kind of actually like the turn of phrase of like spread it out like a bed because then it feels like very comfy and roomy. There's maybe
I've heard carpet as well. He's laid it, spread it like a carpet would be spread, you know? So
yeah, it's like a very gracious host. I think that's the idea behind that kind of wording. Look at this wonderful host just giving you this comfortable land. It's like a bed. a carpet.
It's true. And I don't know if this translation was particularly bad, but when it says, and therein we've given you roadways and stuff, like there weren't even roads really at that point in time. Like people were traversing through as Muhammad was anyway, supposedly traversing through the desert or, on camel. It's not like there were actual roads paved out or that God had done this. But that's an interesting point as well. Was thankful for this like vegetation and be thankful for the animals that I've given you, because it like corresponds to the other Quranic verse where Allah says like, will you not which of like the favors of mine would you deny? Like, can you not see that I've given you plants and livestock to
Mm.
eat from? So yeah, I would obviously like, I guess that's the only defense is, yes, do not take that literally. Let's cling to the verse that says the Quran is literal and metaphorical, but we don't know when and where, so that's on
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, so I think this is not a good criticism of the Quran, to be honest, because it very easily could just be a metaphor. And we can't really say otherwise. And I mean, I think people are saying this in the comments that like, or the live chat, that yeah, like all forms of literature use metaphors and imagery all the time. They're not meant to be taken literally.
And
And
technically, I would also say that the Quran does never claim to be a scientific book. Hello.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. So I don't think. I think that's clutching at straws if you're someone trying to find a weakness in Islam. Not a great defense. Apostate Aladdin is here. So
Okay.
welcome. Glad you could make it. So Apostate Aladdin's point of view is, I don't give this verse much weight as a critic. I don't think this alone proves that the author thought the earth was flat, but it doesn't do much to prove God either.
Yeah.
Well said. I think I
Very well
completely
said.
agree with that. Yeah. Robert makes a good point. When was the last time you read a fiction book that didn't have at least one metaphor or simile? Yeah, exactly. So there is one other thing I wanted to mention here. This one's a bit more complicated to get into, and it was inspired by my Instagram conversation with someone who said he was an Ahmadi Muslim.
Right.
And I don't know how this subject came up specifically, but yes, I noticed you apostate on that. Yeah. I don't know how this specific subject came up, but what happened was we were discussing different aspects of God and where evil comes from. And we came to the subject of hell. And he was adamant that hell is not meant to be eternal. And he added to that hell isn't even a real place, it's just a state of mind. So I never heard those two things before, and he shared some articles with me, and that basically outlined that is, I don't know about the hell is not meant to be a physical place thing, but that outlined that the Ahmadi belief is that hell is not meant to be eternal. And I felt like, wait a second, I'm pretty sure I read in the Quran specifically that maybe more than once that people are supposed to go to hell for forever. I'm going to see if I can pull that one up, and I did find one example to show this individual. I'm going to share it
Mhm.
momentarily.
That's
Okay.
interesting, though. I did not know that Ahmadis didn't believe it wasn't eternal. I wonder how long it's for. Like, is it kind of like what Christians used to think was
It's
purgatory? It's like a
it
short amount of time.
yeah, I think the basic idea is that it's meant to be for as long as you need to be purified.
Oh, okay, until you're
Okay.
rehabilitated enough to go there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did pull up this one example to show him. Maybe it may have been another one. So this is from Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah is the guardian of the believers. He brings them out of darkness and into light. As for the disbelievers, their guardians are false gods who lead them out of light and into darkness. It is they who will be the residents of the fire. They will be there forever.
Mm.
It's right there. It's there in the Arabic as well. Khalidun. So it's right there. And I said, like, how can you deny this? It's right here. And he was very evasive. What he basically said was that according to the understanding of God and what is said about him in the Quran, that he would show mercy to all his followers and that he's loving and compassionate. That there's no way God could put anyone in hell for eternity. And this has inspired me showing exactly where it is in the Quran, and he still wouldn't shake that perception of it.
I mean, again, there are again, this is the problem with the Quran, because I'm just putting myself into the mind of a believer again. I would say the amount of times that Allah calls himself the most merciful in the Quran. I mean, would you really believe it if he didn't keep repeating it that much? That's a different story based on his words and his
Yeah.
actions. But he says over and over again, like Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, God is the most merciful, most forgiving. So, in one breath, when you're talking about the punishment of hellfire, which I agree with you, in many translations, not only does it say forever, it says like therein eternally, or, it's constantly like making you clear that it is going to be forever. But I would say God is the most merciful. And even as a Muslim, like for example, the Jews and Christians are just going to be punished slightly because they still were monotheistic, but they corrupted their scripture. So they'll be in hell for a while, but nobody will be there eternally, because God will eventually move everybody to heaven. And even I did rationalize that and tell myself that over and over again, that, even if you have messed up, eventually Allah would forgive you because he is a Rahman or Rahim. But yeah, I mean, you and I know, but I just wanted to make a point on that hell is a state of mind. I've actually heard black Muslim rappers, say lyrics such as like Mecca is a state of mind. They don't even believe that you would need to go to Mecca to do Hajj. If you were in a spiritual transient like state of flow, I guess, and oneness with Allah, that is a Hajj trip for them. So again, you can take this anywhere, really, right?
You really can. Just to share something from my personal life. So my grandparents, who were Muslims, practicing Muslims, um, what they believed was that God couldn't possibly send anyone who was a good person to hell, because that just didn't square with their view, again, of God being this loving, merciful, benevolent force. And so this didn't come from my grandparents, but one defense I've heard is that what God had to do is had to uh, try to encourage people or dissuade people with things that they would understand. So using fear as an approach. So if you say that you're going to the Quran spends all this time describing what the punishment is for disbelieving and for doing wicked things, and depicted them in such horrible terms as a motivation mechanism, using fear to keep them believing. So it isn't actually real. Like God isn't actually going to do these things, but he's using fear as a motivator.
So it's like the carrot and stick method, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like tailoring your argument to fit the people of the time. So maybe you could argue that Muslims nowadays, they don't need that kind of level of threatening uh, to be believers, but perhaps people from like a different mentality, different world, a tribal world that's like very violent, that you would need that extra kind of motivation.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, I think it's about proportional punishment, right? Like, a lot of Muslims don't want to think that for a crime that or like a punishment or a sin that you could do on earth, that you should be punished eternally. That's not proportional, right? No matter who you're talking about. But like, they'd like to give examples when they want to say that it is forever. Like, wouldn't you want Hitler to be burning in hellfire forever? Okay, most people, like, even Muslims would be like, yeah, that's what we want. Like, try and conceive that conceptually. You're like, eternally though, no matter what's happened, for a god to be so okay with
Mhm.
disproportionately punishing like that. And yeah, I don't know. Again, every type of Muslim will defend it. Like, I think a Salafi Muslim would tell you it's definitely that harsh punishment. Your skin is going to be
Yeah,
roasted
yeah,
over and over again. A Sufi might tell you something very different, and an Ahmadi might say it's a state of mind. So
exactly. And what makes this argument, I think, this defense very powerful, it is connected to the "this isn't true Islam" one, is people just have this deep rooted feeling like of what Islam is, and if it's something that's built on peace and love and grace, they just can't accept anything that doesn't fit that they see with their very own eyes, like beyond the actions of people, just the literal words in the Quran. They just can't see it as it is, and they'll always find some way to spin it because of that. And it's really hard to counter it, I think, because of that reason. This is just to anyone who's watching who is a Muslim, this is why it's a bit difficult talking about these things, because to me it feels like I'm not talking to someone who's being rational. It's just a purely emotional thing. And all I want to say is I understand that. I'm not criticizing that per se. I'm just pointing out that it's difficult then to find common ground, and to present how I feel or why I came to the conclusions that I don't know for sure that Islam is true, when we can't even agree on a word being in the Quran, as was the case with this Ahmadi person I was conversing with.
And to take it further, exactly, it's not coming from, it's coming, obviously, like, I understand if somebody defends, like, something you hold so sacred, your initial reaction is to go on the defensive, regardless of where that stems from. But yeah, there is a little bit of like, you're not really talking on a level rational playing field. And a lot of these things that we're discussing and these concepts that we're trying to defend or unpack or like understand, they're unfalsifiable. A lot of these things, no one's come back from the dead, and like, all we have is that Muhammad went on the night of power, or sorry, the night of ascension, and he saw glimpses into heaven and hell. According to it's a circular reasoning. Like, how can we unfalsify that? But like, apparently most of hell dwellers are women, and there's all these claims being made, but there's no way we can verify them. So
Yeah. Well said, Nuriyah. Anything else you want to say on this subject? Any other comments?
well, just again, it's really easy to hide behind this defense when you're facing other things in the Quran, like Alif Lam Mim, Yasin. That people would definitely say, like, oh, we don't even know what that means. That's clearly poetry. That's clearly a metaphor. But I think the fact that the Quran leaves itself to being those things, it goes back to Hassan Radwan's point earlier that God should have foreseen the problems with leaving that so open, and had, especially for his final last message, should have made a much, much better, clearer word of God.
Unless that's part of the test that he's giving us, so that's another thing.
Oh yeah, like he's confusing us on purpose. Like when the
Yeah.
Christians they've left fossil records to confuse us and trick us into whether we would believe the fossil record or God.
Yeah, exactly.
Even that's such an unfair God. Like, I'm not even okay with this test that I didn't sign up for, and now you're stacking the odds against us to punish us eternally if we fail. Wow. Or not, it's state of mind, who knows.
Who knows? Yeah. There are a couple questions coming in the live chat. We are getting a little bit tight on time. We've been going for an hour. I had a feeling we might be talking and talking and talking,
We
which is
can
a good
always
thing.
do a part 2 secular
Yeah,
spirit of this. I
we'll
know we
see
won't
if
get
it's needed.
yeah.
I just want to mention that, like, so I'm seeing some questions, and Robert, I see your question. I'll leave it to the end for the Q&A if we have time for that. If we don't, then maybe we can discuss that privately. I do want to get on to the next subject, which is next defense. You're taking this verse, this ayah, out of context. This is a really common one as
This
well.
is so common.
Yeah. Okay. So I have two examples that I wanted to bring up with you, and they both have to do with what Muslims should do regarding the disbelievers.
Oof, okay.
Yes. Okay. Let me pull up the first example, wherever it is. Yes. Okay. So I will read it. Also from Surah Al-Baqarah. So, oh no, it isn't. Sorry. I can't tell which surah it's from.
Oh, it is. It says Baqarah. Yeah.
Surah Al-Tawbah. Okay, so,
October.
O you who have believed, fight against those adjacent to you of the disbelievers, and let them find in you harshness, and know that Allah is with the righteous. So, critics of Islam will point to this one. I don't know if this is one that is popular. There's another more popular one that I'm going to bring up in a second, but I wanted to mention this more general one first. So, the idea is, well, look at this. This is saying that you have to fight against the disbelievers around you. That clearly the Quran is calling for Muslims to fight anyone who isn't Muslims and let them find in you harshness, whatever that means. Could mean a lot of very horrible things. I'll do the devil's advocate on this one, like defending the Muslim perspective. So, well, okay, yes, this is in the Quran. but it's meant for a specific time period in the development of Islam, with the challenges that the Muslim community was going through, with specific tribes that were being very malicious and betraying them as well in their agreements and pacts. So this is coming from a position of self-defense. What Allah is saying is, you Muslims, you have to defend yourselves and be strong against these disbelievers because they're trying to destroy you. It's not advocating to go out into the world and conquer and pillage and kill all the disbelievers for the sake of it. It's just to survive. And here's the thing that I would add. I think it's convincing in that sense because there's a lot of scholars that have pointed to, oh, this came for this reason, this came for that reason, this came at this point in time. And I'm sure there's been disagreements over what came from when or what in what order. My concern with this is, although it makes sense, it just makes learning Islam or understanding what you're supposed to do so much harder, because this context is not in the Quran. How are you supposed to know what things are for a specific context and what things are meant as general prescriptions? Is it what came first? Like, is it the order of what came first? Like, do you follow the thing that came last? Do you follow the thing that came first? Who do you listen to on what is supposed to be the correct interpretation and the correct application to a correct specific context?
It's in the tafsir, secular spirit. That's where we get
Who's
the context.
tafsir though?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's all there in the tafsirs. And it says, like, as you can see, it says adjacent to and stuff in that translation. So God was referring to those literal people there at that time that were trying to stop his message being spread. This was the way that God had to make room for Islam, and that was the way to deal with them only at that time. So it's there in the Quran because that struggle was like how Muhammad had to go about like letting Islam grow in its natural form. And these people who are the disbelievers are the Christians and the Jews who have corrupted their scripture. So we have to get them on the right path and take them to, you know, the final right message, which is the word of God. And yeah, it doesn't apply to now. It just applies to then. Obviously, Islam is so peaceful. Don't you see that?
Yeah, exactly. The powerful thing about this defense is you can use it for everything, really. Like any ayah in the Quran, it obviously came at a specific time, at a specific context, and you can just say, oh well, this doesn't count. Or
and secular, they would always say, like, what would you do if somebody attacked your house? Wouldn't you fight back? Wouldn't you fight back? These people were attacking Muhammad, they were attacking the Muslims, so we had to fight back. Otherwise, you know, it's again, God can't safeguard his own prophet and, you know, the people that are spreading his right message. And also just to counter as well, whether it's for that context or that specific time period or not, again, it messes with a Muslim's mind because the Quran to be eternal and timeless. So the fact that it's made it in there in that like slight form with like clear instructions, again, back to Hassan Radwan's point earlier, God should know better than to put that into a book that he says is like timeless and eternal. That's where a massive problem stems. And also, if you look at Islam beyond just your personal belief with God, the actual concept of Islam is either to be in a state of Dar al-Islam or Dar al-Harb, which is either Islam is ruling or it's perpetually in a state of war. So if that is the case with Islam in general, overarchingly politically, then these verses can very much apply if you're currently in a state of war and that's what the Quran, i.e. your manual or what God's word is telling you to do. Technically, there are still disbelievers all around us. So, you know, why wouldn't you act on that? And that's why we see like the likes of, you know, bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, and they're acting it out. They are using it in this modern day and age, and America was their target or whoever.
Mhm. I mean, you could make the argument that if there is something that sounds, you know, horrible to us reading it in 2022, that this is actually proof that the the Quran is timeless and eternal, because each time we have this fresh interpretation is something intended by Allah, is inspired by Him. So we now reading this thing and determining this must be for the specific context, and maybe it meant to be that for those people in that context, or a context 600 years ago, is also part of the true Islam that the Quran is exhibiting. And us feeling differently is also part of the Quran. Of course, the problem with that approach is like us thinking the complete opposite could then be construed to be part of this eternal message, even if it's something that's a complete twisting of it.
Yeah, that's like every day you wake up and you're like, if I'm sad today, oh, that was in the Quran. Oh, today I'm like, feeling happy as Larry. That was the Quran. Like you can once you have the Quran as open as that, you can literally, it's like putty in your hands. You can maneuver it to fit whatever it is you want, and the justifications are very much ones you just gave.
Some people actually find that to be the power of it, which to me is a bit confusing. You'll see that especially with Sufis. I know one or two Sufis who've kind of told me this in a nutshell, that yeah, the text is alive. The text is alive and vibrant, and it can evolve and take new forms as you interact with it. And I've heard that being said also of like how the Jewish people view their text as well. That it's this live thing, and your interactions with it are divinely inspired, or can be divinely inspired. And what I feel about that is, then, to my understanding, what Muslims, let's talk about Muslims specifically, what they're looking for is certainty. They're looking for things to guide them in life. How can you have that stability and certainty when it's like this fluid thing that's constantly open to interpretation, and that you can constantly look at in a new light depending on what age you are, where you're living, what era it is? I don't know. It just becomes wishy-washy then.
I think that in a way, though, that's the only way to let it continue with you in your life, because as we know, like as we grow up and you have more and more life experiences, you evolve as a person. Your thoughts evolve, the way you think evolves, and in order to keep this a living instrument, if you will, at least it's got those like grounding pillars of where you supposedly get your moral compass from, and where you feel like your safety net is, and where you're spiritually at home. I think Islam sets those like good foundational cornerstones for that. Like somebody, for example, who a lot of times the reverts, they like to call them, like to Islam, they are usually looking for some level of structure or like order in their lives, because otherwise we are just like all floating about on this blue speck, right? And it's like ordered chaos. But to not have a grounding tool can seem really like just a scary way to go through life for some people. And again, I think with Judaism, that's why we see like the Reformed Jews so far, is because they are interpreting this as a living thing. And even like how we have tafsirs in the Quran, the commentaries on the Torah are a lot more like actually just that, like commentaries and conversations, more of a Socratic nature. Whereas Quran, you're either given the context in a really brutal manner, or you have to say that it's so beautiful and open to interpretation, as like the Sufis would say. And that again lends to their beliefs more, right? Like if things are, they use a lot of the verses in there to enable trances and get closer to God through zikr and things like that. So they're completely using the Quran for a very different way to what a Salafi is using the Quran for.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, I don't know if Muslims actually practice their religion that way, because you'll hear maybe a Sufi say, "Yeah, I'm just going with the flow of it, and it's like it's so fluid and open to beautiful interpretation." And but then you talk to them, and then one of them says, "Oh yeah, homosexuals are abominations," with such certainty.
Yeah.
That's kind of what scares me about it. Yeah,
Yeah. Even if
yeah.
1% of it can be interpreted in that harsh way, we've got a problem on our hands.
I think, to me, if I want to just say something that kind of is overarching for everything we've talked about, the problem for me of this stuff, I don't mind things being open to interpretation and being looked at differently and all that. Uh, what I worry about is that people are using this as their basis for their lives, uh, built on faith. So it's just it, it's this all this vagueness that they're basing their faith on, when you really probe into it and like what they say. But then you look at what it is in practice, and it's a lot of things that are said with complete certainty. That's what scares me. Like the certainty is coming from not like nothingness, but what they will say is that this is coming from God, like the creator of everything. And when they believe that it's coming from this God creator of everything, even though it's so fluid and not really built on anything stable, they become entrenched in it. It's, I mean, I'll just say this: if I'm talking to someone who's an atheist, and they really believe something, they're not going to be saying that, yes, I believe that this is why things are based on what the creator of everything determined it to be. They'll look at it in more grounded terms, like maybe they'll say, yeah, this is just a man-made understanding, and that man-made understanding is wrong or flawed, and this is a way of overcoming it. When you talk to a religious person who thinks it's coming from a god, it's much more difficult, because if you truly believe that this god is the creator of everything and the source of all that is good, how are you going to change their minds?
Exactly, because if they're everything they hold to be true and good, i.e., their morality stems directly from that God's morality, then there's no wiggle room, right? It's either if your God is wrong on this one thing, then he's wrong. But that exactly what you're saying. There is no room to kind of there's no room to play around, to be honest. That's where cognitive dissonance really, I mean, it doesn't do us any favors when trying to interact and get past that.
Yeah. There's just one thing I wanted to mention, the more famous ayah from the Quran, and this is one that I think I think it's from the same surah, actually. Famous thing of what to do with the disbelievers, or this one, it mentions, the polytheists. Once the sacred months have passed, kill the polytheists who violated their treaties wherever you find them, capture them, besiege them, and lie in wait for them on every way. But if they repent, perform prayers, and pay alms tax, then set them free. Indeed, Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. So this is the number one ayah that I've seen from, particularly from Christians, when they want to point out that Islam is violent. And I want to make a couple points here. In this translation, what's been added is this who violated their treaties part. So reading the Arabic, that is not there. So this added context was added in the English translation to clarify, well, this is not meant as a thing to do at all times. Because the Muslims who are writing this, or like writing the translation, they're aware of the audience they're trying to reach. They're aware of the criticisms that Islam has received, so they throw these things in. Exactly, apostate Latin. It is not present in the Arabic who violated their treaties. So again, I think you can kind of see the point of Muslims who really want to hold on to this, because they're saying, well, this is for a specific context, and for the sake of making that super clear, whoever translated into English wanted to make sure that people reading that know this to address the criticisms. But again, how do we know for sure? How do we know? It's just open to interpretation. And some will point that, well, it says in the end some peaceful things, but if they repent, blah, 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 set them free, because Allah is most forgiving, most merciful. If there's anything that captures the weird contradictions of the Quran, it's this one, because it goes from violence, like advocating for like violence, to mercy, set them free,
He does this
forgiveness.
so much, secular spirit. He does this as well when he talks about like they will be burning in hellfire, therein eternally. Surely Allah is most forgiving, most merciful, and you're like, wow, okay, I'm not feeling that, but you keep telling me it, so I guess I'm gonna believe it for now. But that's really interesting, because as soon as you pulled up that verse, my first, like, as a Muslim, my brain went to the treaties. Like, who do we have treaties with now? See, haha, gotcha. That was just for that context. Like, so that's we see the same thing, by the way, happening with the hadith as well. They are being watered down. Quran, it's happening obviously with like daraba, beat, strike. It's all like in brackets,
Yeah,
like lightly, da da da, completely changing it, making it more palatable to like.
that's another really good example. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's just this translation game, and I can see the point of that too. Like, who knows what the words were intended to mean, because God isn't around to explain it, unless you believe that God is communicating what it's supposed to mean in the true believers of the community. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, whatever that means. So Apostate Aladdin makes this point that even in a specific time context, this means that many polytheists will be hurt just because they were found by a believer who follows this verse. But that's not That's not Islam's fault, Apostate Aladdin. That's that believer's fault. So
Yeah,
Islam is
he's
off the
taking
hook.
it out of context. That's his fault. Right back at you.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Wow, it's really easy to be a Muslim. It's quite fun, actually.
Yep.
There's a defense for everything. We've got it
Mhm.
all figured out.
And Apostate Aladdin makes a great point of, do we or should we afford other people in texts this much benefit of doubt? If there's a statement about killing or fighting or smiting a certain people, do we research the author's life first? A good point, but like, this is the thing, like, the world we live in, the Quran is so vitally important to so many people, so we do have to give it that extra attention and benefit of the doubt, just because it is such a, like, an influence on people's lives. To dismiss it completely, I think, is counterproductive, because then it just, like, uh, widens the divide between us as the, disbelievers who who are being advocated to be killed only in certain contexts, though, and the believers. Apostate Aladdin says the believer should have read the English translation with context 1400 years later.
Yes.
See, it is his fault. Yeah.
Touche.
So we've got 2 more defenses to cover. We've got like 15 minutes left. I don't know if we're gonna have a chance to do a Q&A, unfortunately. But
Sorry, peeps. Next time, maybe.
yeah, yeah. Oh man, it's actually I've got 8 minutes left. So let's see if we can get
Oh,
these
okay.
done. Yeah. All right.
Let's move through.
This command seems bad, but trust in Allah. So this may seem wrong, bad, nonsensical, but our understanding is limited, so we should just trust in Allah and His will.
Yeah, terrible, terrible, terrible one, right? It goes back to Allah knows best. So yeah, again, some secular spirit. We are mere mortals, okay? He is the Lord of the Lords, the Lord of the
We're
world.
flawed, limited.
We're flawed. We don't. Allah has told us specifically in the Quran that don't even think about matters to do with the soul or the ruh, because it's beyond human comprehension. So when we see gay people being thrown off the highest, tower of that town, that might seem bad to you, but Allah knows best. Okay, that he should have learned from the example of Prophet Lot and what happened to him, and that was a great learning in that. So Allah knows what is good and what's natural according to our world, so we have to trust in him.
And this really ties into this feeling of, I know what Islam truly is here, right here. I'm tapping my heart. I know what it is, and there's no way Allah could do such horrible things. Like, it's for a purpose. I believe in it, and I know I'm being a bit facetious in how I'm behaving, but it is powerful, and I completely understand it. There's this feeling of hope and this feeling of, yes, there's goodness in the world, and people don't want to let that go, even if they see all this evidence to the contrary. And all I really want to say to Muslims who feel this way is, I understand that you have these beliefs, but take yourself out of this box of belief and try to see it from truly open eyes, and then assess it and see what you think, like, from someone who's not a Muslim, who's not a believer, and figure it out that way, and then see what happens. I think that's a step that a lot of Muslims are scared of taking, or scared of fully taking, because they can't step outside of that box, because they're wondering, what's going to happen if I leave this box?
Yes.
What will I lose?
It's the fear as well, like that Quran is it's a great book to like instill a lot of fear in you. But I would just echo what you're saying. Like, if the command feels wrong to you, if it doesn't sit right with you, even just being a modern human, then there's a reason for that. I know that you have to give Allah a free pass, because as we said earlier, if Allah commands something that's wrong, then that Allah is seriously flawed, and all of Islam and your religion might, collapses in on itself. But if genuinely, like, as a human being, we are all kind of born with our intrinsic sense of right and wrong anyway. So if it does seem wrong to you and your God is vehemently opposed to it, or encouraging or endorsing it, then follow that. Like, listen to your inner voice, or whatever that is,
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. Just like a little anecdote to share here.
Yeah.
Is my brother, he told me, so I have a younger brother, and he left Islam as well, we never discussed it. He knew I'd left too, but we never really discussed it. And when I asked him, why did you leave? And he said, so my background's Palestinian. And he was saying that when I saw the horrible things that happened to Palestinians on the news day in, day out, I think there was this one specific war where children were killed from a bombing. It just snapped him out. It like took him out of the box. And he realized, like, could there be this loving God that I've been believing who would allow such horrible things to happen? Or is it possible that it's man-made? So this isn't the reason why he left Islam in its entirety. It's just the thing that got him out of that perspective of undoubtedly believing that Islam was the truth. I don't think that's a good reason to leave Islam, the problem of evil, because there is that defense of it that it's meant as part of God's plan, which again is unfalsifiable. I will give it that. But I think when you take that step, like my brother did, it opens the door to looking at your religion in a more honest way.
Yeah, I think the problem of evil is a great one for people to start questioning. As you said, like the defense is that it's all part of God's plan, but there's very much like an appeal to divine retribution and divine justice, which, as you said, is unfalsifiable. So we're stuck with that one. And then you also throw in Pascal's wager. So people are like, okay, it feels wrong. It might not even be the case. But if it is, I want to be on the winning side. And I mean, I understand the reasoning behind that. But if it means that you're living this one lifetime and this experience in such a narrow lens, just in case of that, that's a bit weak as well. But again, I can see why people want that comfort blanket.
Yeah. Apostle Aladdin says, they're not reasons to leave Islam, but they shake enough reason to people to rethink what they base their belief on. Yeah. And last one, which unfortunately we're only going to have a little bit of time to cover, but this one is a fun one. Islam is still better than atheism, and to just expand on that a bit, at least Islam offers guidance and hope and love, which is better than the nihilism and selfishness that atheism offers. Yeah, so this is like one of the more last resort emotional arguments that I've heard from some Muslims. Like, if they can't really address the things that are being criticized, they'll say, like, at least Islam is about something that's good. Like, what are you offering? So
Was saying this, they'd come straight at you and say, well, what's stopping you from sleeping with your sister or your brother? You know, you guys perpetuate incest and you have no morals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that you know, atheists are mostly rapists, and Stalin was an atheist, and Hitler was an atheist, was an atheist, and look at the regimes that you guys have brought on, and as you said, lawlessness, nihilism, existentialism, all of it. Hedonism.
Well, I mean, yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, like the main thing to point out is that this is like a false perception of atheism that's being propagated. You aren't a nihilist just because you're an atheist. You could become a nihilist through atheism, obviously, but a lot of atheists hold a lot of values of like humanist values and all sorts of other things that aren't necessarily religious ones. And there are some atheists that have spiritual beliefs that aren't tied to any god or anything like that. So it's just this is the worst defense. That's why I saved it for the end, because it's presenting this false choice that if you're not Muslim, then there's nothing beyond you just going around killing, raping, pillaging. And from my point of view, it kind of scares me, because it makes me wonder, is the only thing stopping these Muslims who say this from doing all these horrible things the fact that they're Muslim and they believe that it's true?
Because that's
which is terrifying. Yeah, it's terrifying. I honestly, I don't think it's true for those Muslims. It's just the way they've been taught to view the world. You know, it's just this false thing that has been put in their heads by the Islamic teachings, that you'll be lost and confused without Islam, that life has no meaning without it. So of course they'll see it in those terms, and that's what keeps the people, the believers within Islam.
Yeah. The most fun one I've had recently as well is, what's stopping you from having sex with a monkey if you believe that humans came from monkeys? So
I haven't heard that one.
It was a recent one I got. But do you see like how much there is to unpack with that? Because we start going on like right, let's talk about what a scientific theory is. Let's understand what evolution is. Let's explain that to you. So there's a lot of groundwork to be done, but they'll just throw these things where, you're trying to connect the dots. But I completely agree with you. I think you said it beautifully, and I am mindful of time. But just because you leave Islam, yes, it feels like the rug's been pulled from under your feet. You could be falling into an abyss. But with atheism, again, there's no dogma. It's not religion. We, as Secular Spirit said, you're all able to pursue whatever it is you want to, devoid of Islam. And to think that we should give Islam a free pass just because it tells you what's halal and haram and what to do with people who leave it, that's not good enough if the values and everything else within it are creating extremists and terrorists. So we've got to discuss that. Like, you talk about nihilism and all of this, but look what Islam is producing when it's fanatical. It is literally that in itself. So yeah.
And the thing that kind of gets lost, I think, sometimes when people make this argument is, what about the truth? Like, don't you want to live your life built on the truth instead of just having comforting wishful thinking that you want to just believe in rather than nothing?
The pursuit for truth, exactly. And I think that's a beautiful way to describe what eventually most people would lead them to atheism, I think. But it is that pursuit of truth devoid of Islam. Like, to be able to think Islam is not the truth, but there might be something out there, and whatever that truth is, I'm comfortable in whatever discomfort that provides initially. And then you develop values. Like, I consider myself a humanist. I'm sure Secular
As do
Spirit
I. Yeah.
also does. Yeah. So we all have our little understanding of how we like to think about the world.
Yeah, I think we just become a little bit self-involved and narcissistic when we start to say, that the universe was created and God has a special plan for all of us. And we want those things. Like, we want to be important. We want to have this purpose. And for some reason, it doesn't feel as powerful or as motivating when we create that for ourselves, or it's something coming from other human beings. We want it to be something coming from something greater than ourselves. We want that significance to be something that transcends us. And I get it because we're flawed and there's all these problems, and we are limited in our understanding and our power and our abilities, and we're all going to die. And so believing in these things that are coming from this supposed eternal source of love and good, it just feels so much better. But then you take on all this baggage like, how did we get from that kind of feeling to, my son is a homosexual and that's why I can no longer talk to him?
Yeah.
Or why I should kill him for disgracing my family. That's the thing that scares me. That something so horrible that can come from something so loving. And that, in a nutshell, is why I find these defenses so problematic, because they're used to bridge that divide between love and such incredible hate.
That was so beautifully said. Wow. 100%. I agree.
Yeah, but more importantly, as Hassan Radwan says, the Argentina match is kicked off.
Okay, sweet.
For the
Thank you
World
for
Cup.
letting me know. Yes.
Yeah. So I unfortunately have to go for that other live stream, actually a little bit late.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you again, Nuri, for joining me, and thank you everyone else for coming. As I mentioned before, I do have a Patreon if you want to support this channel, and please visit Nuriyah's channel, Holy Humanist, and support her if you want to as well. We've collaborated on a few videos together in the past, and you can find those on her channel, and I'm sure we'll do another one in the future too.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me, Secular Spirit. This was fun.
It was a pleasure.
Live, I'll be tuning in.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, just a last reminder for everyone that if you want to support the ex-Muslim community, you can do that with the hashtag ex-Muslim awareness month or ex-Muslim month, whatever you want to put in. I'll be doing that as well for the upcoming month of December.
Yeah, so, please spread the word. Bye,
Thank you, everyone, and I'll be back with another video soon.